Thanks a lot. Cheers. I'm sorry for being late. The reason I'm late is because there was a vote at the Commons at 7 o'clock that I couldn't miss. And I don't want to stop people from boozing either, to be honest. Let me just say this. I know the whole theme is a bit about war and disability. I just want to say a couple of things. In 2008, I'm the secretary of the Justice Trade Unions Group, and that brings together the Prison Officers Association, Probation Officers, NAPO, PCS, and occasionally, although they're not trade union, the Police Federation. In 2008, we did a piece of research, and it was about the number of ex-military who were in the criminal justice system. The government's figures always put it at 2,000 or 3,000. When we asked every probation office right the way across the country to feed us back their figures, because we thought the government was in denial. The figures that we got back then, as largely down to the work of one hero, which is Harry Fletcher, some of you may know him, was 20,000 ex-service personnel within the criminal justice system. 8,000, well more than 8,000, 8,500 within prisons. 10% of the prison population. And when we drilled down into what those people were doing within prison and criminal justice system, the bulk of them, to be frank, had mental health problems and issues around violence and alcohol. Now we forced then, the government didn't believe us, we had a cross-party group, I'm the secretary, Elke Include from Plaid Cymru is the chair, a whole range of other MPs as well. We forced the government to undertake its own survey. They've come back with much lower numbers, but nevertheless we actually forced them to recognise that this was an issue. And we said to them then, all those things that had been put in place, largely actually by the Attlee government, to support people post-Second World War, had been, well, undermined, to be frank, undermined. And it wasn't just affecting the general population in terms of disabilities, it was having specific effects on ex-military personnel because, obviously, we've been at war now for a number of years in different scenarios. The key issue for us was not necessarily to get the numbers exact, but to understand what was going on. Now, some of you may have read the book Regeneration. The film was back on again at the weekend. After the First World War, it took a long time to get an understanding of the mental health implications of people in combat zones. All the research that we've forced the government to do has demonstrated that actually the number of people, ex-military personnel, who are within the criminal justice system relating to issues around violence and alcohol are those ones, there's a much higher proportion who've been in combat roles. I know it sounds blindingly obvious to us, but we've had to go through 5 years of this to get some understanding of it again. And we campaign for resources to be put in place that will tackle that issue. Basic psychological support, analysis, etc. In America, they go through a process. When you come out of the military, they go through a process of what they call decompression. And it's like a diver coming up from below. You get rehabilitated into society with an understanding, particularly if you've been in a combat role, what's happened to you and what you've suffered. We've now got the government, well, working to a certain extent in terms of trying to provide some of those services. And this month, as a result of some of the work we did, we got the Defence Committee, Select Committee, to do its report. And it came out a couple of weeks ago. And what's interesting in it is that they've taken on board some of the issues that we've drawn attention to about psychological support, etc. They still don't accept the scale of the problem, but it just gives you an indication of, and it really makes me angry about this, it just gives you an indication of what priority gave. We did this work in 2008, 2009. They then acknowledged it round about, I suppose, 2012-13. It took them a year to commission the research into the issues of we call it the drivers of excess alcohol consumption. It then took them another year to actually review the support that was required, particularly for the families. So we're talking about 6 years on in terms of trying to get stuff in place and all the lobbying that we did with the British Legion and others. And still, we're not in a situation where they're fully put in place the issues in which they can support people coming back from combat areas, particularly with regard to this issue between alcohol and violence. And the tragedy of it is, a lot of it is about post-traumatic stress disorder that then triggers domestic violence. And again, if you look at some of the figures coming out from Shelter about the number of people who are homeless, the number who are ex-personnel that are homeless is absolutely staggering. So there's a trend here, isn't there? That people serve their country, they come back, they don't get sufficient support, and they either wind up on the streets or they wind up in prison, or both. And you can see on many case histories that journey, if you like, coming back from a combat zone, getting into trouble, not being able to cope with the world, and then unfortunately being drawn into the criminal justice system, and then also then finding themselves homeless. So a lot of that is about relationship breakdown. We're still not convinced that the government understands the problem effectively. But one of the things we highlighted, that at least they could get the compensation scheme sorted out. At least they could deal with the numbers and make sure people had sufficient financial support. Most of us probably told you about the promises that were given by David Cameron when he went to Camp Bastion. You know, within, well, I've got to watch my language here. Within a limited period of time, people get their, 80,000 of them get their letters saying they're pushed into all the things will be reviewed. But even those within the system, we highlighted the backlog of cases just being for the compensation schemes 2 weeks ago. Let me just read you this. It basically said the concerns of the backlog that there still is, despite assurances provided by the Ministry of Defence that the processing times have improved and backlogs are reduced. This is a basic compensation scheme. We understand that serving personnel and veterans are still experiencing long delays in having their claims processed. And that's for the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme and the War Pension Scheme. They're not complicated assessments, to be frank. They're not, we're talking about getting people basic compensation for when they come back suffering from their disabilities. Then we went on, and this is the conclusion of the Defence Select Committee report. I'm not a member of it, but they've interviewed various people, so it was seen as independent. It said, despite assurances from the MOD and the Department of Health, we're still worried that as the operations in Iraq and Afghanistan fade from public eye, the necessary long-term support for those injured will not be maintained. That's my fear as well, because that's what we're seeing right the way across the disabilities front. Not only are they're worried about the existing support being maintained for ex-military personnel, but as they go into civilian life overall, because we're actually being denuded of support for people with disabilities right the way across society, these people will lose out as well. And it is, I tell you, it is a depth of anger. Remploy factories set up after the war to give people employment, supportive employment, to make sure that they had the dignity of work, closed down. The work capability assessment run by Atos and now with Maximus, demeaning people to the point where we've had people committing suicide as a result of that. But just demeaning them and then denying them the benefits, people living in poverty and then being hit with sanctions if they don't comply. To be honest, that's angry making. And the good thing, and I conclude with this, the good thing at the moment is people are so bloody angry we're not taking it anymore. That's why DPAC, Black Triangle and all the other groups and WOW are all campaigning and getting out there. And I think that combination of making sure we get the message out there about how people with disabilities are being treated in this country in 2014, which is meant to be a civilised, wealthy country, getting that message out there I think is critically important. But also part of that, getting that message out there, like meetings like this give us the opportunity, working through our trade unions, making sure we put pressure on the electoral process. But also I have to say the direct action campaigns have been incredibly successful, and I've supported every one. And the reason I've supported them, because when the political process doesn't work for you, when you can't break through the media, to be honest, all that we've got left is the streets. And that's where we've been. I just finish on this. I congratulate DPAC, Black Triangle, WOW and everyone else who's been involved in these campaigns. That exercise with the occupation of Abbey Gardens at Westminster Abbey was absolutely superb. when people turned up in their wheelchairs, there's 60 of them, and occupied those gardens, and then when 300 coppers turned up, some of them armed, I think that sent a message out to society that we're not taking it anymore, no matter what you throw at us. As you know, some of you will know, I tried to liaise with the priest there, and he wouldn't talk to us at one point. So I put down a motion in Parliament, an early day motion, which reminded them of the Sermon of the Mount, which was, blessed are the poor, they inherit the earth. It isn't blessed are the poor that they will be kettled and ring-fenced with armed police officers. It will be that we will inherit the earth. Well, I can't wait for heaven. I want it now, and I want it for people with disabilities. Solidarity.
Right, so
now you can go and get some drink.
you can now go back to the festivities. Once again, thanks very much, John. Cheers.